with Walsh Middle School in Round Rock, Texas. Do we have somebody from Walsh Middle School? Okay.
Go ahead. Okay. Hi, we're from Walsh Middle School.
And the class that you're in?
Miss Scrub's class.
U.S. History.
And
US
what grade
history.
are you?
8th grade.
U.S. History?
Yes.
Hi, thanks
Hi.
for joining us today. Okay, go ahead and mute your microphone. Do we have someone from Mountain View Preparatory School on the line? Someone from Mountain View Prep, like to introduce the class.
Did you hear us?
Yeah, your camera's bouncing around a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Say it again, Trevor.
I was at Aptly Preparatory, 6th grade.
Can you step up to the microphone? We can't hear you.
Hi, we're Aptly Preparatory, 6th grade.
And who's your teacher?
Mr. Truck.
Hi, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank
You can mute your microphone when you're not on being called. That way we'll keep some of the echo down. Thank you. Craig Public Library in Craig, Alaska. Do we have someone online from Craig?
Yep, you've got me online so far, and I see somebody driving up, so we'll have more in just a little bit.
Okay, thanks for joining us. McCann Technical School. Do we have McCann online?
Can you hear us? Yeah, can you hear us?
I can hear you, but I don't see anybody.
We're working through some technical difficulties right now. We should be online in a couple minutes.
Okay, would someone like to introduce their class, or do you want us to come back to you?
Go ahead.
Don't look at me.
Would you like us to come back to you, or is there someone who
Yeah,
would
we
like to
got
introduce the
we
class?
got one coming up right now to introduce us.
Okay, great.
Hi, we're from McCann Tech. We are all 10th graders in Mr. Recor's U.S. History class.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Downtown High School, San Francisco. We have you online. Anyone from Downtown High School in San Francisco?
Yes, I'm here,
There you are.
but there are no students.
No students yet?
No.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us.
Okay, Mr. Record,
And,
I'm going to try to restart the system one more time.
I guess from
that's
here
fine.
we'll go ahead and introduce our presenter today is going to be Mark Adams, who's the Director of Education at the Truman Presidential Library in Independence, Missouri. My name's Linda Rosenblum. I'm with the National Park Service in Washington, D.C., and I serve as the moderator for this series. And at this time, we'll ask that all of the schools keep your microphones on mute until your presenter calls on you to respond to a question or opens up for a school to ask a question, so we don't have too much background noise or switching of the cameras from back and forth from different cameras speaking. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mark and let him take the program from here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I say good afternoon because where I am in Central Time Zone, it's just past noon. I know we've got people at different time zones in different parts of the country, so welcome to the Truman Library and Museum here in Independence, Missouri. If your geography is not wonderful, it's about 20 miles east of Kansas City. And I'm just giving a thumbs up from my tech guy. I think we're good to go here. We have a PowerPoint on one screen, and hopefully you can see that. And then I'm on the video. We have two connections today to try and keep me on the screen so that you're not just looking at a PowerPoint. How I'm going to try and do this today, we have a lot of schools for this second session today. So I'm going to try and get input from all of the schools as we go through in the next 45, 50 minutes, so bear with me. What I'm going to do first of all is kind of give you a background information on the Truman Doctrine and a little bit about the Truman Library itself. And then I'm going to share out some primary source documents And I'm really hopeful that the teachers that have signed up have checked their email in the last 2 or 3 days. I've sent out some documents ahead of time for students to look at. And I'm hoping that through this technology that we can have some interaction with those documents and that you can let me know what information you can find from those, and we'll analyze those together. And then we'll certainly have time for questions. So as Linda said, for now, keep your microphones on mute for the second, just because it will cause too much feedback and echoing if we don't do that. But I will be calling on some of the schools as we go through. Probably one school at a time would be probably the easiest, rather than a free-for-all, because if everybody starts to talk at the same time, it'll be hard for me to know who's trying to contribute. So let me give you a little bit of background information. Hopefully you can see that opening slide there. I wanted to start with a quote from a historian, Robert Farrell, who's actually from Missouri, where we are presenting from right now. And you can see the Truman portrait behind me in the Truman Library. And Robert Farrell's an esteemed historian from Missouri. And he thought that the foreign policy that Truman charted through the Truman Doctrine was the principal accomplishment of Truman's presidency, which says a lot considering the Korean War and the decision to drop the atomic bomb, desegregation of the military, recognition of Israel, all of these other huge decisions that Truman made as president. He felt that the change in foreign policy, as it says in the quote, from abstention to participation in the affairs of Europe and the world, was his principal accomplishment as president. And so that's really what we're going to be looking at today, is how Truman changed American foreign policy in 1947 from where United States had been an isolationist and staying out of. I'm going to pause for a second. I have a school coming on that probably needs to mute their microphone, if you could. I think you did that. Thank you. So let me get into an introduction here, give you some background information so we have some context for some of the documents we're going to be looking at, and to give you a sense of where we are in the world, where we are post-World War II. Of course, World War II ended August, September 1945 with the drop in the 2 atomic bombs by President Truman in Japan, and ultimately the Japanese surrender in the USS Missouri. And a couple of teachers have emailed me some questions ahead of time about when did the Cold War begin, and that of course is debatable, but some of those tensions were emerging at the end of World War II, even before the end of World War II. One of the main reasons Truman wanted to drop the atomic bomb was to stop Soviet expansion into Japan in 1945. So certainly those tensions were there. They were there in the Potsdam Conference of July 1945, but they grew after the end of the war. You had Soviet expansion into Eastern Europe. You had the Allies, US and British troops and French troops on the ground in West Germany and West Berlin. So those Cold War tensions were already there. Now we fast forward about 18 months to February of 1947, and the British are stepping back. They're stepping back from India, they're stepping back from Palestine, and they're stepping back from Greece and Turkey. They are more concerned now about domestic matters and their economy and repairing the damage from the Blitz and World War II. Just as a full disclosure, I am British. I'm from England, and although I've worked here at the Truman Library for 17 years, I will try not to let that British perspective sway my presentation today. But just in case you get that coming through on my accent and the heavy cold that I'm suffering right now, hopefully you can understand my accent with the cold as well. So in February 1947, the British Embassy informs the US State Department that Britain can no longer prop up the governments of Greece and Turkey. They're pulling all of their financial and military aid that they've been providing for quite some time. This is no surprise to the US. They've known about this for a while. What is surprising is that they tell them in these notes that are passed, these diplomatic notes that are passed, that they have a March 31st deadline, so about 6 weeks. So I mentioned the Palestine issue. This serves as a good comparison for when you look at the recognition of Israel in 1948. The British withdrew similarly from that territory, but they gave about 18 months notice. In 1947, they gave notice that they would be pulling out of that area. Here, it's about 6 weeks. So the theme for your Presidential Primary Sources Project is leadership in the time of crisis. So this is where Truman faces a crisis. The British are pulling out. Greece and Turkey are unstable, and we'll look at some of the factors there, not just economic, but political instability. What can the US do, and how can they accomplish it? So what we're going to do today is we're going to be looking at some of the primary sources available to us here at the Truman Library and have you look at some of those. Now, we're just going to be looking at 4 or 5 documents today. It's a very cursory, brief look at some of those documents. I just wanted to point out that in our collections here, in our archives, we are part of the National Archives and Records Administration as a presidential library, one of 13 in the country. And we have 16 million document pages in our collections here at the library. They're not stored off-site, they're all in this building. And about 8 million of those 16 million relate to the Truman presidency, 1945 to 53. And then a portion of those, of course, is the Truman Doctrine, amongst others. So we're going to be looking at some of those documents to determine Truman's actions, why he did what he did, and some of the reasons for that, and how quickly he had to act in this time of crisis. As I mentioned, he had about 6 weeks before the British were going to pull out. So just a little bit of background, some history on the situation. This was not a surprise to American policymakers. Policy is usually, at that time, really created in the State Department. They're responsible for monitoring issues around the globe, so they're not surprised. They were monitoring the situation in Greece. They were aware of communist uprisings in that country from the National Liberation Front. They were aware of economic and political conditions really crumbling after World War II. Greece had suffered quite considerably during World War II. And so they were well aware of those issues, and they were well aware of the British support that had been taking place in Greece. In Turkey, they'd also been following the situation in Turkey as well, particularly geographically or geopolitically, with Soviet pressure to try and share control of the Dardanelles Straits. Now, you'll see us on one of our cartoons later on, the geographical and political nature of that particular stretch of water that stretched from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, giving the Soviet Navy access to the Mediterranean if they were able to get control of that particular stretch of water between European and Asian Turkey. You will see that as an issue in the 19th century when the British are trying to keep the Soviets or the Russian Empire at that time out of that area. And it's a point today with the Russian troops on the borders of Crimea. So that Dardanelles Straits is always that access from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean is always a key factor when dealing with the Russians or the Soviets, depending on the time period you're looking at. When the British announced that they would withdraw, it seemed obvious that the responsibility would pass to the United States. They had now become the global superpower in the West, particularly since the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs and the crumbling nature of the British Empire at that time. But it wasn't a foregone conclusion, and what kind of support would that come in? So as the information came through to the State Department, the person in charge of that information and charting a course of policy was Dean Acheson. He was the assistant or the undersecretary of state. The secretary of state at that time was George C. Marshall. As you'll see from one of our oral histories later, Marshall was not in the office when this information came in, when this note was passed from the British to the Americans on a Friday afternoon in February of 47. And when Acheson was made aware of this crisis, this is when he first articulates the domino theory. It's often associated with the Vietnam War and Lyndon Johnson's involvement there, with the spread of communism if South Vietnam falls and so on in the 1960s. But in fact, the first time that phrase is used is in 1947 by Dean Acheson. And he becomes worried that if Greece and Turkey fall, then what next? Will it spread into the rest of Europe, or if you go east from Turkey into the rest of the Middle East? So they were very concerned about the spread of communism outside of that area of Greece and Turkey, either into Iran and into India or into the rest of Europe, which of course Eastern Europe was primarily under communist control already after the end of World War II. The legislators, when hearing from Dean Acheson and in very dramatic terms, they agree, both Republicans and Democrats agreed that something needed to be done, but they did say that Truman had to address the country, had to address a joint session of Congress to convince people of the right course of action. Now, the point to be made here is that until that point, we're talking about the Cold War, no American leader or American politician really had warned of the communist threat. If you remember back to the end of World War II, the Soviets were the part of the Allies. They were with the British and the Americans and the French in defeating Nazi Germany. And so many people still thought of the Soviets as one of those allies. Now, in March of 1946, Winston Churchill from Great Britain had given his famous Iron Curtain speech, which did talk about the threat of communism and the threat of Soviet expansion a year before. But no American leader had done that. And this is really where Congress and Dean Acheson and others were pressuring Truman to let the American people know that communism was a threat, and certainly in this area of Greece and Turkey, it needed to be halted. So that's kind of the background situation for the context of the information we're going to be looking at through primary sources. We're going to be looking at 2 or 3 different types of sources today, and I am going to want your feedback. I'm hopeful that you've been able to receive those ahead of time. I'm going to show some of them on the screen, and so you might be able to react to some of them that way. But I do think if you've already looked at them ahead of time, it's going to be easier for me and easier for you to give that feedback. We're going to be looking at some oral histories, interviews with people involved. We're going to be looking at 2 or 3 political cartoons, and we're also going to be looking at the Truman Doctrine speech as well. I did want to point out that all of this information is available on the Truman Library website. So although we'll be doing a passing glance of this material today, you will be able to get access to any of those materials afterwards through the Truman Library website, trumanlibrary.org. There's about 30,000 online documents there, and about 500 of those focus on the Truman Doctrine itself, but on many other issues related to the Truman presidency. And so the first one we're going to be looking at is an oral history. That just means an interview with one of somebody involved in the crisis. In this particular case, I've chosen Loy Henderson. He was in the State Department, and he was head of the department within the State Department that dealt with Greece and Turkey geographically. Generally, these divisions were broken up on geographic lines. He was the director of Near Eastern and African affairs in the late 40s. He becomes a key figure, in fact, in the recognition of Israel in 1948. We do have many other oral histories available. We're just going to be looking at this one. And the excerpt I've sent to you is about 1.5 pages just on this issue. The oral history itself covers many, many issues related to his career in the State Department. But what I'm going to do now is I am going to go to the link for this oral history, and then I'm hopeful that I'm going to give you some background here on this link, and then I'm going to be calling on some of the schools. Let me get this so it magnifies for you. There we go. Now, I'm just going to take the schools in order that I have them, and if I miss you, then I apologize. Let me see if I can make this larger. There we are. If everybody else could keep their microphone muted, except for Walsh Middle School in Texas, if you could turn on your microphone and just let me know, first of all, if you've been able to access this document, this oral history interview with Loy Henderson ahead of time, or if this is the first time that you're seeing this today.
I believe it's the first time.
First time.
First time. Okay, I tell you what, to save on time, I'm going to come back to you. Are there other documents that you've seen ahead of time today that I can come back to you on later on?
A few, I believe.
Maybe the cartoons?
I don't think we have the cartoons.
No.
Maybe the Truman Doctrine itself?
No.
The speech?
No.
Okay.
Just as biographies.
Just the biographies. Okay. I had sent the teacher some of these 3 documents, but I will, if you guys want to take a look at this oral history, if you have it, do you have it in front of you now? Or only on the screen?
Only on screen.
Only on the screen. Okay. I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave that part up for you. I'm going to switch to a different school. I apologize. I just want to see if we've got a school that's already looked at it, because it's going to take quite a bit of time for everyone to read through. If we could switch to Cottonwood, Arizona, and I believe we've got Mountain View Prep. And if you could send... Hi there. Were you able to look at this oral history interview ahead of time?
Yes.
Okay, so if I could get one student volunteer to come to the microphone and have them give me a summary of the information, just maybe 3 or 4 sentences of the information they were able to find in that oral history interview.
All right, here's Zach.
Hi.
Hi, did you say your name was Zach?
Yeah.
Hi, Zach, go ahead.
So what do I have to-
Give a summary of what it was.
Just a summary.
So it was about what happened on the Friday of February 21st. And so it was talking about his experiences with the counselor.
And what did
And so he was giving aid to Greeks, and he was also giving aid to Turkey. He was talking about that. So because they were greatly affected by the war.
Just a little bit louder.
He was talking about how to affect Greece and Turkey, and he was saying to help Greece and Turkey because they were affected badly by the war. And most of it hit England. Like in Germany.
Very good. Anything else?
No.
That's a good summary. I'm going to switch to another school. So if you guys, that was excellent. Thank you. If you want to mute your microphone, and let's go to Alaska, the Craig Public Library.
Hi. It's still just me. So
Just you.
we're still waiting for students. But this
So
is
if you-
absolutely fascinating.
Well, good.
given
We're going to
what's been
come.
going on for the past 5 years.
So should we come back to you when you have some students, maybe in a little while?
That would be great.
Okay. So we're going to switch to North Adams, Massachusetts, McCann Technical School. Don't forget to unmute your mic. I hear noise. So were you guys able to see this? Were you able to see this document ahead of time?
We were. Yes.
Okay, could I maybe a volunteer that give me maybe a summary, but also maybe some focus on the last couple of paragraphs where I had bolded the original?
Yep, if you'd like to give us just 1 second.
Absolutely. And I put that last paragraph on the screen for your convenience.
Someone's read something.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Jordan's going to give us her take.
Okay, make sure you come close to the microphone.
All right. So in this summary, Henderson is talking to his publisher, and he's discussing the letter that they just got from Britain about Britain not having enough money and things to support the financial aid going towards Greece and Turkey. And he and someone else are writing, I forget the word that they use. They're writing something to, they're writing something so that they can bring it to Congress, and Congress can talk, and they'll talk to the president, and they'll try and make a speech or something for the president, and they'll just go on from there. And yeah, someone else can say something, because
Anybody else want to add?
Nope.
Let me interject there, if I may. So what they're doing is he's writing up kind of a draft of a speech for President Truman, kind of a draft of policy. And so they're trying to lay out the course of the action. What I want you to focus on is what I have on the screen, and I bolded it when I sent it to you, and I just lost it. Hang on. Forgive me. I shouldn't have touched it. In this part that's on the screen, I'm not sure if you can read that on the screen or not, but there's a change there that Truman makes. When they talked about, with Dean Acheson, the policy was going to be expressed, and it says in quotes, the free peoples of the Middle East who are resisting attempted subjugation. So my question there is, and it's fairly straightforward because I put it in front of you. When that was put in front of Truman, what did he change, or how did he change the policy that was suggested to him? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
He said any nations that were getting, who were trying to resist attempted subjugation.
Absolutely. So rather than just limiting the policy to the Middle East, i.e. Greece and Turkey, Truman suggested or decided, because it wasn't a suggestion if the president said it, that policy was not going to be just for the Middle East, but it was going to be for the whole world. And this is where the American foreign policy changes. And this oral history is very revealing, because you might have thought that policy came from the State Department or it came from Dean Acheson, when in fact it was Truman who expanded the policy suggestions, not just from Greece and Turkey, not just the Middle East with Iran being a question, but to spread it across the globe. We are going to resist communism wherever we go. Thank you for that, school. If you could go ahead and mute your mic, I'm going to call on some of the other schools when we get to some of our other documents. Going back to the PowerPoint. So Lloyd Henderson there, he's talking about how the policy came about, the drafts and the redrafts between February and the speech on March 12th that we're going to look at. Bearing in mind, we have a March 31st deadline, so they were working frantically. As you saw, if you read all of that document, the oral history, they work through that weekend, and by Sunday evening, they're presenting a draft of the policy to Dean Acheson. That's presented to his boss, George Marshall, on Monday morning, and then that is then forwarded on to President Truman. And then those conversations about expanding it to the rest of the globe start to take place after that. So to look at the document itself is our next task, which is, what I've got here is I've got two links, and I'd be sure glad to share this PowerPoint with the teachers so you get the links. One is a transcript of the speech of the Truman Doctrine in March of 47. We also have an audio. I'm not going to do that today because of some technical issues. I'm not sure how that's going to carry through. But in your classroom, you could certainly listen to the Truman Doctrine speech in Truman's voice. And I would suggest as an activity, following the transcript while listening to the speech, and you'll see Truman's era of emphasis as you do that. We're going to look at this document. This is the Truman Doctrine speech itself. I really hope that you've been able to see this ahead of time. We're going to call on a different school. Let me call on Downtown High School in San Francisco. I think they were on the line earlier. No Downtown High School, San Francisco. Are there any schools, middle school, high school, grade school, doesn't matter, that I have not called on so far, that are on the line? Any schools I have not called on?
Do we have Denton, Texas on the line yet? We're still checking with them. Denton Ryan High School in Texas. Are you with us?
This
I
is the
guess not.
TTN office. Denton is supposed to be connected, but they were having issues with their camera and mic, so we
Okay.
believe they're just viewing the content today.
Okay.
Okay,
So let me go.
they can hear us, but
They're just viewing. Okay, that's fine. Oh, I got something. I got a big hi from
There they
somebody.
are.
So do I see
There they are.
Denton? Let me ask Denton a question. Would you like to participate via the microphone and video, or would you just like to watch today?
We would just like to watch today since we didn't get the documents ahead of
Well, I appreciate that. If you would go ahead and mute your microphone then, and we'll move on to the next school. I appreciate you responding. I want to go back, if I may, to Walsh Middle School in Round Rock, Texas.
Go ahead, Maddie. Maddie, it's on.
Okay, now, were you able to, I know you didn't sound like you'd been able to address the documents earlier. Have you been able to look at any of them since I was last on?
We have not.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay, were you able to see any of the oral history that I posted on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you like to give any input on that? Anything in that document surprise you?
I was a bit surprised about how quickly they had to move in making the document.
Right, they had from February until the end of March to kind of take some action. Absolutely, that's a really good point. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and I'm not sure if I made it very clear, is that that interview with Lloyd Henderson was done in 1973, 6 months after Truman's death. So does that make any difference to you when you're looking at that kind of document?
I believe it could, if the death were to be war related, I suppose.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of the passage of time.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I believe maybe they may have wanted to do something quickly since it had been very soon since he is, passed away.
Well, I might have got my wires crossed there. What I'm talking about, the interview itself that we read from took place in 1973. The Truman Doctrine speech was given and these passage of notes by the British to the Americans was in 1947. So we'd had 35, 36 years has gone by before this interview with the State Department official has taken place. So is there anything we should consider there in terms of analyzing this primary source document?
We should probably consider the era in which it was written. Also, since there hasn't been much contact with, I'm sorry, I forget. I didn't hear what you said about.
Well, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but a lot of time has passed from when the Truman Doctrine policy was enacted until this interview with the State Department official. Do you think that would affect his recollections or his details of his involvement?
Yeah.
As 35 years.
Start again. Start.
I guess that it could affect his thoughts about it because this would be later and they would know if it had worked or not. So, yeah.
Right, so they had the benefit of hindsight that the policy had been, the historians by then had viewed it very favorably, 35 years on. And when you do get the chance to look at that in detail, it's pretty remarkable how he kind of remembers who he was on the phone with and almost a minute-by-minute account. So his recollections seem very strong. But you're absolutely right. That benefit of hindsight, it was a positive policy that had been viewed well in the interim. So that part of it certainly should be factored in when you're looking at any primary source. Good responses. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to mute, and we're going to go back to Cottonwood, Arizona, and our Mountain View prep.
Hi, we're here.
Hi. Were you able to look at the Truman Doctrine speech at all? the one I have on the screen at the moment? Were you able to see that one ahead of time?
Yes.
Okay, so just as before, is somebody there available to give me maybe a summary of that speech given by President Truman in March of 1947?
Yeah, Gage can.
It was, well, I'm Gage, and the summary was that he wanted to spend a lot of the country's money on.
Speak up.
What? Yeah. Oh, he wanted to spend a lot of the country's money on rebuilding Greece and Turkey, and he also wanted to send aid into the countries.
Very good. And did you notice any difference in the amount of time he talks about Greece and the amount of time he talks about Turkey?
Not really. I didn't notice anything.
Anybody want to help you there?
Anybody else notice?
It kind of talks about Greece and the
But did it talk about Greece?
it talked about Greece long because he was
I'm having a hard time hearing you, but let me restate what I did here. I think you said you spend a lot more time talking about Greece than Turkey. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
Okay, you'll notice when you look at that, there are paragraph after paragraph about aiding Greece, and then there's a very short paragraph about aiding Turkey, and then it moves on. How much money was he asking for?
$40,000.
Not $40,000. Try again.
400 million.
$400 million. So I have a challenge for you. I'm not going to give you homework because that wouldn't be my job, but my challenge for you is to find a tool on a website somewhere that will convert that to today's dollars, and then have your teacher email me that amount of money later today or tomorrow to see how much that would be in today's dollars, because it's changed dramatically since then. Thank you, Arizona. We're going to switch to the McCann Technical School in Massachusetts. Are you guys still on the line?
We are. Yes.
We are. Now, I believe you'd looked at the Truman Doctrine speech ahead of time.
That's correct.
Okay, would you like to give me some feedback, a summary, and anything that you found revealing about that document?
Sure, just give us 1 second. We'll get a volunteer for you here.
Okay, thank you.
Sam is going to give us her take.
All right.
All right, so the president pretty much said that communism was a threat not only in the U.S., not only overseas, but also in the U.S. And that since Great Britain couldn't support the nations anymore, we needed to step in, not only for helping Turkey and Greece, but if we didn't do that, there might be a threat of sorts in the U.S.
Very good. Now, I have a question for you. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I guess I am. Let me see if I can phrase this so it's not too tricky. What country is not mentioned in the Truman Doctrine speech? What country is not mentioned that you might expect to be?
Iran.
What? No, is it?
Which country is this policy aimed at? Who are they fearful of?
Soviet Union.
Soviet Union, and yet, look at that speech. Is the Soviet Union mentioned one time?
No.
Does that surprise you?
Yeah.
What word does Truman use instead of Soviet Union?
Armed minorities or other outside pressures.
Armed minorities, and what political system does he mention that we should be afraid of?
Communism.
Communism, 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 communism. And that's what he keeps talking about is communism. That has some backfiring because some of that starts to harm Truman at home with the Red Scare and investigative committees in the 50s because of fear of communism in the United States. But at that time in 1947, a president had never accused the Soviet Union of being overly aggressive. This is one of the first shots in the Cold War, so to speak, through a speech. And so the Soviet Union is not mentioned by name, but certainly the philosophy and policy of communism certainly is. I'm going to keep this school on the line, kind of like we're going to serpentine around here. Were you guys able to look at any of the political cartoons?
Yeah, we were.
Would you like to choose one to analyze for me?
Let me take the pulse of the group here. Give me a second. Which one was the first? We'd like to do the Uncle Sam on the foreign policy log, if you got it.
We'll get it. We'll pull it up here. Whoops. So you've looked at this one ahead of time. And maybe a volunteer or two to talk about this cartoon.
Sam, go ahead.
Alright, so I believe that for this cartoon, it is kind of for and against the Truman Doctrine, because what is happening is Uncle Sam is crossing the log that says New American Foreign Policy, and he is blindfolded. So it seems to me that they are kind of worried about crossing it and not going over and helping them because they don't know what the outcome may be, and that something else could happen to them that would affect them badly in the long run, but they seem to actually be trying to go over and help. Yeah.
Very good. And do we have another volunteer there? Another take on that one?
Noah, go ahead.
I think it's kind of showing him going out on a limb, which is kind of the joke with the log there.
Nice.
It's a big risk that the U.S. is taking.
I like that, going out on a limb. Well spotted. Do we see where the limb ends? On the left side?
The edge of the paper.
Just goes, yeah, the edge of the paper, right? Into the front section. Yeah, it's kind of, in some ways it may be, is he walking a plank out there? Is there another cliff on the other side? We don't really know. Certainly you mentioned Uncle Sam being blindfolded, and how is the walking stick indicated? What can you tell by what the cartoonist has done there with the walking stick? What is that showing you?
Supposed to mean he's blind.
He's blind. You got some. Does it look like there's some movement of that stick?
Yeah.
Like he's shaking it or tapping it as he's going along, and he's blindly going into this policy, so they don't know what the outcome is, as you suggested. What about the water beneath the log? A little louder.
Crashing waves.
Crashing waves. Not really a calm blue ocean there, is it? Not very serene.
Not at all.
Okay, very good. You guys did a really good job with that. Let me switch to another school, but thank you. That was McCann in Massachusetts, was that right? You guys did a really good job. Thank you very much. We're going to run short of time, but I'm going to switch back, if we can, maybe to Walsh Middle School. I'm going to just knock this down. Walsh Middle School, are you back on the line?
Go ahead. We're on the line.
What I thought I'd do here is, because I know you didn't get the chance to look at these ahead of time, but I've got a cartoon up there for you that I figured you could do on the fly with the 2 question marks. Do you guys see that one?
Yes.
So can I have somebody who wants to quickly interpret that for me, because you haven't really had the opportunity to do that, and I figured you might be able to do this one. fairly quickly.
I think it kind of shows that it's like which one is for the greater good, because like there are consequences if we don't help Europe, but there are also consequences if we do help Europe. So it's saying kind of all like, well, either whichever way we look, there's a negative side to it as well as the positive.
Okay, very good. Anybody else?
It kind of says that, like, there's one question, can we afford to help Europe? However, there's the bigger question is if we cannot afford to help Europe.
Exactly
Yeah.
Right.
So,
How effective do you think that cartoon is?
I
Getting
think it's
Go ahead.
fairly effective in showing how uncertain the U.S. is in this current time, because they don't know the outcome, as was from the previous cartoon.
Very good. So in the previous one, when we saw them going on the log and the not very convincing old Uncle Sam blindly going into this new policy, and here we see these questions: can we afford to help? And then can we afford not to help? And so that's the bigger question there. Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to go quickly back to the PowerPoint to start wrapping things up. We did have a third cartoon there. We're going to skip that one for today. But you can certainly look at that. The teachers have been emailed those. And if you didn't get them, you can certainly email them and I can get them to you. I just wanted to draw a conclusion and then open it up to some questions. So Truman, through that joint session, asked for $400 million in aid, both military and economic aid for Greece and Turkey. And then it becomes dubbed the Truman Doctrine that really became the policy for the next 40 years. As I mentioned, it wasn't just for Greece and Turkey, but it was to prevent the spread of communism across the globe and became known as containment, to contain the communist threat. Really, when people talk about the beginnings of the Cold War, that's back to 1945. But the beginning of the policy of containment, I would argue, starts with the Truman Doctrine speech of March 12, 1947, and that's a crucial point. The questions historians have asked about the Truman Doctrine regarding its origins and its long-term consequences, certainly people can debate that about whether it begins the Cold War, whether it's, whether it made matters worse between the United States and the Soviet Union. One thing is for certain, it changed the policy, that long-standing policy that I mentioned at the beginning of isolationism is now long gone. Just compare the membership of the United Nations, where the United States is now heavily involved in the United Nations, compared to their lack of involvement in the League of Nations after World War I. And so now I'd like, if any schools have any questions, I'd be glad to entertain those. I know we have a few minutes left, but maybe if we could go from one school at a time, start maybe with Walsh in Round Rock, Texas, and then maybe go through each one real quickly if we have enough time for any questions. Any questions from Walsh Middle School?
Yes, right here. Could you say that the Truman Doctrine effectively, I guess, paused the onslaught of communism in Europe?
It probably could be argued that way. I think the one issue, the one crisis that you might want to look at to kind of reinforce that would be the Berlin crisis of the following year, when you really do have closer on-the-ground troops with the Berlin blockade and Truman's response to Stalin's blockade of Berlin. So that would be the one where you get close to military action. So this is the policy, but the following year, 48 in Berlin, is probably an even stronger example of where communist threat to West Berlin is halted by the Berlin airlift.
Yes, because of the pressure.
Excuse me?
Because of the pressure of all the soldiers.
Right, and the fact that West Berlin had been completely encircled by Stalin and Truman didn't back down and kept them alive with that airlift that lasted 18 months to the point where Soviets backed down. They weren't really asked to back down in Greece and Turkey, but they did have to back down in Berlin.
Which kind of effectively split it in half. I see.
Then it ended up splitting the country in half. By 1949, you had an East and West Germany, and you had the dividing line between East and West was in Berlin, not in Greece or Turkey.
Yeah.
But it was the Truman Doctrine led into that crisis. But it's a crucial area to look at is the Berlin blockade. Next question should come from Cottonwood, Arizona. Mountain View, excuse me. Any questions?
Yes, we do.
Fire away.
Not loud.
Okay. What drove Stalin to try to take over the other countries?
Could you say that just a little bit louder?
What drove Stalin to try to take over the other countries?
What stopped him?
What drove him?
What broke him? Is that what you said? I think that the answer to that would be the Berlin crisis of 1948 when it all comes to a head. It looks like Stalin is trying to take over all of Germany with that move on West Berlin, and the Allies stand up to that without going to war. So that's kind of the first indication that although it didn't break out into conflict with armies, the fact that the British and the French and the Americans put their allies' lives on the line to supply a city for 18 months through the Berlin airlift showed Stalin that they were going to stand up to him. So that's where that spread of communism is stopped there until probably some of the events in the 50s in Hungary and the Czech Republic. Good question. Let's go to Massachusetts. McCann Technical, do you have any final questions? I know we're getting real short on time.
Yeah, we have two, if you have time, two quick ones.
Let's try two, and then we'll see if they cut us off.
Jordan, go ahead.
So, after we eventually get things going and start helping Turkey and Greece, does Great Britain eventually pour some aid into helping us help them? Or
No.
do they just shut themselves up?
They shut themselves out. They pull out of India, they pull out of Palestine, they pull out of Greece and Turkey, and they completely focus on domestic matters. One thing to remember is that during the Potsdam Conference in July of 1945, Churchill loses the British general election and is replaced by the Labour Party, and they start introducing domestic reforms like the National Health Service and so on. And so the British mindset is no more war, and we want to try and fix our domestic economy. And so for a while, they are done with foreign affairs. There's no one wanting to go to war. Rationing is still taking place in Britain in 1947. I know my parents went through that. They tell me about it. Cities were destroyed through the Blitz. So there was very much a kind of an internal, we need to fix our own country first. And it's not until the mid-50s that they come back on the international scene with the Suez Crisis of 1956 and somewhat in the oil crisis in Iran between 51 and 53. Those two areas where they both involve oil, not coincidentally, because it affects oil to Great Britain, they become back involved in those matters. You also have the formation of NATO in 1949, and so they tend to want to have NATO and the United Nations take care of matters rather than Britain by themselves. Great question. Are there any other schools on the line that haven't had a chance to participate that would like to ask any questions? While I'm waiting for that response, teachers of all the schools who participated, thank you. And if you have questions you want to have the students email me, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, I'll turn back over to Linda. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, Mark, for being our presenter today, and what a great program you had. And we want to thank all of our schools for participating. James, do you want to put up the slide for us that shows the link to the Presidential Primary Sources Project?
Sure.
Thank you. And once you see the slide with the link, you'll be able to go back and watch the archive stream at that site. And we also want to invite your schools to join us for our upcoming sessions in April and May. Our next session will be with the Theodore Roosevelt Library, and it's called Theodore Roosevelt, Making Peace and War, hosted at the Dickinson State University on April 8th. So at this point, we're going to thank you for all for joining and for what a great session we had and what great questions we all had. And we'll sign off at this time. Goodbye.
Thank you.